Usually when someone moves abroad, they have something that's pulling them there. It might be a new job, a partner, studies. We've been living in Copenhagen for 3 years now, and we had none of those reasons to why we moved here.
I was born in Stockholm, in Nacka to be more specific, and I grew up living in Stockholm, in Sweden. I've lived in California for a year for studies, and I've also lived in Gothenburg on the west coast of Sweden. Other than that, I had never really lived abroad, and there were a few reasons to why I wanted to move away from Stockholm. When my husband and I met, he had previously lived in Copenhagen before we knew of each other. He used to work full-time as a DJ and house music producer, and a lot of his friends lived in Copenhagen. Also, he's not from Stockholm. So he had already lived in Copenhagen and had this idea of Copenhagen being a very chill and nice place to live. But obviously he was in his 20s, and that was a long time ago now. For me, I had only been to Copenhagen twice, I believe. I went here for a concert that didn't go very well because I ended up at an opera, and that wasn't where I was meant to be going. And I had also been in Copenhagen over a weekend with my sister, and okay, so maybe 3 times. And I also had been here with my husband for like a short trip. I didn't know much about Copenhagen. I had like spent a week here in total, and I didn't know much about Denmark other than the stereotypical things, you know, it's the neighboring country to Sweden. And yeah, I guess in Sweden we see Denmark as the loud kid in the classroom, a place where there's a lot of racism and a lot of sexism and those kind of things. And that was pretty much the idea I had. But then I also had this very vivid feeling about like the community in Copenhagen, or how people were in Copenhagen. And I still have this idea, and I still feel that Copenhagen is a city where people are very creative. A lot of creative people move to Copenhagen. There's not a high threshold to start creating in this city. And since I love creating things, I love hosting events. I had been arranging concerts and events and things since I was a teenager in Stockholm. I was really drawn to that idea of being in a city where it's easy to create and to make things. So we moved here in August 2020. This was, now we know, this was in the beginning of the pandemic. At that time, we thought the pandemic was maybe coming to an end. So we moved when it was like a little pause. Things were going the right direction for a little while, and that's when we moved. So I'm gonna tell you a little bit about Sweden. If you're not Swedish, this might give you some insights on Swedish culture, and if you are Swedish, maybe you agree or you disagree, please let me know. But I feel in Sweden we are very thoughtful. We are very aware of not disturbing one another. We are very polite, and we are very quiet, generally speaking. This means that we are very afraid of offending anyone, and the threshold for when you're afraid to like offend someone is very, very low. So I mean, the normal thing to do in Sweden and especially in Stockholm is to ignore people, meaning that when you are in the grocery store and you see someone that you think that, okay, maybe I know this person, or maybe I recognize this person from somewhere, you don't say hi to that person, because what if you're wrong? That would be a catastrophe. You would embarrass yourself. That would be like the worst thing a Stockholmer can imagine. Meaning a lot of interactions never happen. So sometimes when I watch sitcoms or like American movies in general, and some random things happen. I don't know, someone starts talking to another person on the bus stop and then the story begins. Like those kind of things rarely happen in Sweden. Also a random thing, but also maybe tells you something about Stockholm. Stockholm is very clean. I know some cities in Asia are also very clean, where it's like you will get a fine if you throw a gum on the ground or something like that. But Stockholm is very clean, and that's nice. It's nice to have a clean city, but I feel that also says something about us wanting to be very polished and very like everything has to be tidy and clean, everything in its place. Nothing can be like outside of the box. And I also felt kind of restricted by that. Not because I want to do like something outrageous or that I'm very chaotic. I think that I'm also very Swedish in so many ways. But I felt that I wanted to be somewhere where I could feel that I could be myself more. Yeah, I just felt like that wasn't my vibe. So during the pandemic, we were working from home. I was already self-employed, so I was already freelancing and kind of working from wherever. And my husband, his office closed down and everyone had to work from home. So he asked his manager if he could work from Copenhagen for a year. So that's what we did. We had an apartment in Stockholm. We rented out our apartment and we moved to Copenhagen. So now let's answer your questions about housing in Copenhagen. So if you are Swedish, you are aware of the system in Sweden of buying an apartment, and when you are buying an apartment, you're actually not buying the ownership of that apartment, but you're owning the right to use that apartment as your apartment. We have this system in Denmark too, but in Denmark we have two ways of buying apartments. In Denmark you can buy an andel. Andel is this kind of, we all own the building together and I own an apartment, and that's where we are living now. We have an andels apartment. Or you can buy an ejer apartment, which means like owning apartment, owner's apartment. I don't know how to translate that, but that is different. And in those cases, you don't own the building collectively. You own your apartment completely and you can do pretty much whatever you want. The difference also from Stockholm and Copenhagen or Sweden and Denmark is that when you buy this andel, this collective sharing building apartment thing, you cannot put the price on your apartment yourself. It can only be up to 6% or 8% over the price that it was bought for, something like that. I know there's a lot of rules around this, but that's the main thing. The idea in Denmark is that more people would be able to buy an apartment, and I think the idea was the same in Sweden when it was introduced, because before that I guess you had to only have like a private landlord, but now people could kind of create a little group and buy a building and share the apartments. And I like that idea, but in Sweden the apartments are sold on the free market, meaning the prices can rise a lot. So it's way more expensive to buy an apartment in Stockholm than it was for us to buy an apartment here in Copenhagen. Now the downside of the system in Copenhagen is that Because of the cheaper price on these apartments, it creates another sort of competition. So my best advice if you want to move to Copenhagen and buy an andels apartment is to look up the organization, the förening of every building that you want to live in, and ask if they have a list that you can put your name on. I suggest that you Google all the rules because I don't know them. I'm just trying to explain from whatever I learned living here. What we did when we moved here was that we rented an apartment for a year. We actually rented an apartment that was quite expensive for us and it was quite small, but that was what we knew we could like easily move into, and that worked for us for a year. We had that first year as a like test period, and then we were decisive that we wanted to stay, and that's when we wanted to buy an apartment. That's a suggestion. Look for something to rent for a while, kind of test out the water, see if this is a place where you want to live, and go for it after that. The thing that makes me so happy that I live here every day is that I can bike everywhere. I have a big group of friends that are also internationals, people coming from different countries. It's actually quite hard to get to know Danes, but Copenhagen is a very international city and a lot of people move here to do different things, meaning there's a lot of open-minded people that are open to new friendships, and that has been so nice to kind of get a lot of new friends as an adult, because I know that can be tricky. And just biking everywhere gives me such an immense feeling of freedom, and I never have to kind of be in a crowded metro with a bunch of rude people. Also, I feel generally people here are more easygoing. I feel there's more diversity in how people dress. I feel you're allowed to do things your way. There's not so much policing among neighbors and stuff. Like, people are more like, they don't really care. This can be both good and bad, but I feel it's quite freeing to be in a city where you're not that strictly controlled by society or like, I don't know, people. And it's such a beautiful city. Like, we live in an apartment built 100 years ago, and it has crooked walls and it has all these old details that I think are so nice, and it's just a very beautiful city. I'm just super happy to be in Copenhagen. I've had experiences here that I don't wish upon my worst enemy, but I've also had experiences here, or most of the time it's just, I don't know, it just feels easier to breathe here. It's just a simpler life. I'm grateful every day for like the sunshine in my bedroom and having like a little balcony and being able to put on like my sandals and bike to a thrift store. And I don't know, I just feel life is very simple and easy and kind to me here, and I love Copenhagen. It's easy to be a creative person here, and that just brings me so much joy. If you have any questions at all, just ask them here below and I will try to answer. Yeah, I think that's it. I hope to see you soon, and subscribe to my channel.